Hey everyone, so today I wanted to share my thoughts on the new Natasha Denona Retro Glam palette. As soon as I saw this palette, I knew that I wanted to have it just because it is a little bit different than any other Natasha Denona palette we've seen, and it's different than other palettes I own in my collection, although I have found some good affordable options that will give you a similar vibe if that's what you're looking for, so I'll share those at the end. But I just love this color story. I think it's really interesting. It's kind of colorful, a little bit neutral, but I think it definitely makes color a little bit more approachable because I'm not someone who wears super intense, really vibrant, colorful looks every single day these days. So when I do wear color, I kind of like something like I'm wearing today that's just a little bit softer. So I filmed this look as well as a look that's a little bit more like pink toned and smoky that I really love as well. So I thought I would share those with you in today's video and just share some swatches and comparisons and just my thoughts on the palette. So this palette retails for $69. It is available on Sephora's website as well as on the Natasha Denona website. I was able to get mine for a little bit of a discount because I did purchase it during the Sephora holiday savings event, which was really nice. This packaging is a little bit nicer than other Natasha Denona midi palettes. There's like this beautiful raised design. Well, it's kind of raised within the palette and then there's a clear cover over it. But we're used to kind of seeing more of a plain design overall when it comes to these midi palettes. So I love the design. I think it is perfect for the palette. The palette itself comes with a bunch of different green tones. There are actually quite a few greens in here, a few neutrals, some deeper shades and lighter shades, a couple of pinks as well. So the Retro Glam palette was inspired by the Natasha Denona Mini Retro as well as the mid-sized Glam palette. So the Mini Retro is really nice. I love this one. I think it is just an interesting color combination, and whenever I use it, I love how my makeup turns out. I actually skipped over this one when it first launched just because I felt like I didn't necessarily need it, but I think what's kind of fun about this is the shadows look a little bit different on the eyes than they do in the pan, and I feel like they look a little bit different on everyone. So even though there are only 5 shadows in here, I feel like you can get a few different looks out of it, which is nice. So this is actually one of my favorite Natasha Denona palettes. She also has the Glam palette, which is a little bit bigger. This one is perfect if you love neutral looks, but it really is a Glam palette because you can do something a little bit softer and more natural, but the shimmers in here are really pretty and vibrant, so you can definitely glam it up, do something a little bit more smoky and intense. And then I do have the Retro palette, which based on what I've read, this doesn't really, or this isn't an inspiration for the new Retro Glam, but this is definitely one of my favorite palettes as well. There are a few shades in here that are kind of similar to the new Retro Glam palette, like a couple of pink tones, but overall this one is very, very different. So I think the Retro Glam palette is a lot of fun if you're someone who kind of likes to play around with color, but you're a little bit intimidated by it. Mint eyeshadow is one of my favorite colors to wear, and I do have a couple of other mint palettes that I've had in my collection or that I do currently have that I enjoy, which again, I'll share those at the end of the video if you're looking for some affordable alternatives. But I also like the pinks. I love like these neutrals. I feel like they work really well with the greens and the pinks. And when I first saw it, I wasn't sure about the color story. Like I knew I was drawn to it, but I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to get a ton of cohesive looks out of it. But after watching the different videos on Natasha Denona's YouTube channel, she was able to create so many gorgeous, really interesting looks. So today I filmed 2 different looks. I'll share those with you guys in today's video and just kind of chat about how the eyeshadows performed. And then I'll come back at the end and share the alternatives with you. Okay, let me start with the pink and silver look first. So I'm taking the shade Lucy and blending that into the crease as a transition. I do think this one is a little bit darker on the skin than it is in the pan. So I was pleasantly surprised that I was able to build it up a little bit. It's not going to appear super intense on the eyes, but for me, I think it will make a really good transition no matter which shades I'm wearing, the green ones or the pink ones or even the more neutral ones. Then I'm taking the shade Belle in the palette, which is the darker pink, and I'm just blending this into the crease and building it up a little bit for some depth. This is one of my favorite shadows in the palette. It's very creamy, very blendable. You can build it up a little bit too, so you can do a softer look or get a little bit more of a pigmented look, but I think it's so pretty in the crease and definitely one of the best colors. Then I'm just taking the shade Holly, which is the lighter pink, and just using that to kind of blend the transition color and the crease color together. There are 2 kind of cooler toned metallic deeper shades in the palette. They're kind of similar on the eyes. Honestly, I wish one of them was a matte shadow or they switched it out for something a little bit different. My favorite out of the 2 is the shade Maxi. I think it has this really pretty kind of silver charcoal tone to it, so I'm just blending that into the outer corner. I initially initially went in with a brush, but I felt like I wasn't getting the intensity I was looking for, so I applied it with my finger and then took a brush to kind of pull some of it out into a wing shape. I don't usually take metallics in the outer corner. I usually like a deeper matte shadow, so whether it was like a gray toned matte or a deep green, I would have loved to see that in this palette because it is missing that matte depth in my opinion. And I'm just taking the shade Flare all over the lid. This is one of my favorite shades too. I just think it's so pretty. It makes your eyes look really smooth, very, very soft. I'm focusing this on the inner 2/3 and not really blending it too much in the outer corner. And then I just kind of go back and forth between that silvery gray and this shade and just kind of blend them together right where they meet so there's not a harsh line. I did take a little bit of the gray shade and blended it into the crease just to create a really soft effect. I went in with the shade Flutter, which is definitely more of like a sparkly topper shadow, and just placed that right over the center of the lid to kind of bring the two shades together. And I do think it looks really pretty combined with these colors. I used the deeper pink bell all over the lower lash line just to tie things together. And then I also took the shade Maxi, which is that silvery gray, just to blend things together as well. So here's what the eyeshadow looks like without any eyeliner or mascara. I just wanted to give you guys a look at it. I think the shadows blend really well together. I'll make sure to list the eyeliners I used in the description. I used like a black on the upper lash line and smudged it out, and then a really pretty like pinky purple on the waterline. This is just the Becca highlighter in the shade Opal. I added that to the inner corner for a highlight because there isn't really a shade that I would typically use as an inner corner highlight in the palette. So I added some mascara, and this is the final look. I probably wouldn't have paired these colors together if I was just using random palettes in my collection, but I love how it turned out. Now, as for the green look, I felt like I had to do a green look because there are so many green tones in here. So I'm just starting with the shade Fringe and blending that into the crease and then up as a transition color. I do think the two matte greens in this palette end up looking kind of similar on the eyes. I end up using the other matte green on the lower lash line in just a second. So again, I kind of wish they would have switched one of those out just to create a little bit of a different look because they end up looking very similar on the eyes. The shade Evergreen is one of her cream to powder shadows, and I actually love this formula. At first, when I tried, what was it? I think the Zendo palette, I wasn't sold on it, but now I tend to use more of a stippling motion, and it just gives my eyes such a smooth look. I will say this one's a little bit darker in the pan than it is in the eyes. I wish it was a little bit deeper because a good dark deep green would have been perfect for this look. So for the lid, I just took the shade Oz and blended that all over. Out of all of the metallics, this one is probably the least intense. It's a little bit more of like a satin finish, so I did build it up a little bit to get it to look a little more vibrant, but I ended up going over it with another shadow in just a second. And then I just used a little bit more of Evergreen, which is that cream to powder. I love this formula. Again, there are a lot of these in her retro palette, which I love. I think they are so pretty, so smooth, but this one is just not quite as vibrant as it looks in the pan, which would have been really nice to have. But it does apply really nicely to the eyes. So again, I'm just taking the shade Oil Slick, which I used in the other look, and I'm blending this on the upper lash line, and I'm going to smudge it out with a shadow. I wish that I had stuck with this because I used the shade Jazzy on top, and I think it does create a really soft wing and just adds a little bit of definition, but I did end up going over it with liquid liner. Like I mentioned earlier, those two deeper metallics end up looking so similar on the eyes, so I really don't see much of a difference once I actually apply them. So I did end up going over the lid with the shade Palladian. It's a really pretty like bright mint. I love a good mint metallic eyeshadow. I feel like this just added the brightness I was looking for. The shade Oz is a little bit more subtle than I typically go, so I feel like this is nice. Between the three metallic shadows, they all kind of end up looking a little bit similar on the eyes, which is the case with my ColourPop palette, my mint ColourPop palette, so I feel like it just kind of happens with that color family. So again, it might have been nice to see maybe one of those shades swatched out or swapped out for something different. I'm just taking the shade Sage, which is the other matte green, and blending that on the lower lash line to tie things together. And then I just added the ColourPop eyeliner in the shade Kicker on the lower lash line, which is a bright silver. I feel like it ties things together, and I just added a little bit of highlight in the inner corner. So this is the final look. I probably would skip the liquid liner if I was doing it again and just leave that softer wing. I feel like maybe that worked a little bit better with the pastels, but I was just kind of craving something a little bit darker because the deeper shades weren't really doing it for me. But again, I do like how it turned out. Before I get into some of the other palette alternatives I mentioned in today's video, I did want to mention that Sydney Grace actually put together a bundle called In Mel's Memory, which I absolutely love. Mel Thompson was such a bright light, such a beautiful soul, and she actually created this bundle when Natasha Denona had released the mini retro palette. So they actually took the shadows that she put together and they're selling them as a bundle. I'll put the information in the description box below. I'm definitely picking it up, but I did want to mention that a percentage of each bundle actually goes to Mel's family, and I'll put Mel's discount code in the description as well, because again, the proceeds from that do go to her family too. So of course, it's an amazing way to support Mel's family, but I think she did such a gorgeous job on this bundle too. It comes with very beautiful shades. If you're looking for something maybe a little bit more vibrant, a couple of peachy tones and pink shades, this is so perfect. So lots of great reasons to try it out, but I'll put that information in the description. As much as I love Natasha Denona, I totally understand and recognize that not everyone wants to spend $69 on an eyeshadow palette, and I totally get it, especially if you're not someone who wears greens and pinks very often. It really might not be the most ideal option to add to your collection. But if you're someone who's looking to incorporate the occasional green or pink look and you're looking for a more affordable option, I do have a couple of products to share with you. The first one is kind of an obvious one, but ColourPop's The Child has some really beautiful green tones in it. I would say some of these are very, very close to the greens in the Natasha Denona Retro Glam. I also like this palette because it has a couple of neutrals too, so if you're not wanting to do a complete green look like I have on right now, you can definitely pull in those browns, that gold to kind of tone down the greens a little bit. I also think this formula is great. I don't have any complaints about it. It's definitely one of my favorite ColourPop palettes. ColourPop also has a pastel palette called Mint to Be. I don't have that one in my collection because I think I ended up decluttering it after getting this one. I just figured I didn't need both of them, but the shades in that one are also very close to shades in the Retro Glam from Natasha Denona. I would say ColourPop's formula is different than Natasha Denona's, but I think the metallic shadows give a very similar effect. ColourPop's might be even a little bit more vibrant if that's what you prefer. I also wanted to mention these two little palettes from Essence. So these are $3.99 each. And honestly, if you were to purchase both of them, or if you have both of them, you can get very, very similar looks just using these two. Now, I won't say this formula is quite the same as Natasha Denona. I mean, Natasha Denona is $69 for the mid-size palettes. These are $4 each. But if you're someone who likes more of a buildable formula, something a little bit softer that you can gradually build up, this might be a little bit more ideal for you. I do think Natasha Denona's formula is a little bit creamier, a little bit more smooth on the eyes. It does feel better, and I think it should because it is a lot more expensive, but these are really nice too. And again, if you combine these two color stories or you're just looking for the pink aspect or the green aspect, these are perfect. Dancing Greens really is such a gorgeous palette. I just wore this in a YouTube video the other day. So this one has a couple of green shades. The metallics are amazing. They're very vibrant, very, very smooth. I'll actually share some swatches with you. And this deeper matte green can be built up to look really intense on the eyes. One thing about the Retro Glam palette is that it is missing just a couple of darker shades to really intensify the looks, and I feel like a shade like this would have been perfect in the Retro Glam palette. I also really like this one. It's kind of a unique neutral. I mean, it is a brown, but it has a little bit of a green base to it, and then you just get like a light, kind of like soft shade that you could use for the brow bone or the inner corner. So out of the two, I do prefer this one. And then this one comes with very similar pink tones. Honestly, like this metallic is very close to the metallic in the Natasha Denona palette, and then these two pinks are kind of close to the matte pinks. I like this shade as well. I feel like that looks great on the eyes. Again, this is a little bit of a softer palette. If you cover up this color, you're going to get like a very soft, subtle pastel look, but you could always incorporate another palette if you want something a little bit more dark and dramatic, but I do think these shades come very close to the shades in Retro Glam. And again, if you purchase both of these or you have both of these, you definitely have a lot of similar options, and you could get quite a few looks that look very similar to Retro Glam, especially if you have just like a regular neutral palette laying around and you wanted to pull in some of those too. So I just wanted to throw these out there in case you're looking for a more affordable alternative, but like a similar color story. So overall, I am definitely a fan of the Natasha Denona Retro Glam palette. I think it's a lot of fun. It's a little bit different. I think looking at this color story, I might have assumed that it would be like a typical spring palette just because there are some softer shades, some neutrals, and I'll definitely get a lot of use out of it during the spring season. But I've also been enjoying it right now, especially like the pink shades, the cooler tone smoky shades. I feel like you can definitely create just a lot of different options, which is nice. If you do tend to prefer more dramatic, colorful eyeshadow, something a little bit more intense and vibrant, this is not going to be the palette for you. She does have other colorful palettes that are really beautiful, but I think this is more of an ideal option for people who like to or hope to incorporate color in their routine, but they're a little bit intimidated by something like the Circo Loco palette or the pastel palette. Okay, so that's everything I wanted to share with you in today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I'm actually going to film a video this weekend testing out some products that I picked up from Sephora during the holiday savings event. I think I'll actually use this palette in that video as well, so I can do another look. I think there's maybe only one shade I didn't use, but I kind of want to try something maybe like a little bit more creative. Like Natasha Denona combined the pinks, greens, and neutrals, so I might try a look like that. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for being here. I'll see you guys very soon with a new video. Bye.